It's Detective Kris Pedigo.
What's your official title?
So I'm a major crimes detective for Louisville Metro Police. I'm a sex crimes detective. Recently we went through kind of a merger, so sex crimes and crimes against children merged. We now operate, or will operate soon, under the title of OSPI, so it's Office of Sexual and Physical Investigations.
That's a deep, deep job to have. How do you handle that?
It is, it's tough. I mean, it's, because you're dealing with, crimes that are, they're intimate in nature, young victims, vulnerable victims, and then, having a family of my own, you're trying to balance your personal beliefs and stay objective to the investigations, and, it's tough. It's not easy.
I can't imagine letting go of some of that when you go home for the night.
It's hard. That drive home, I get to decompress a little bit, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that some of that bleeds over. You can't shake the anxiety or the frustration or whatever in that drive time home, so it does.
So why do you do what you do?
It's just so rewarding. I mean, it is, all crime and all criminals should be punished. But when you can hold someone accountable for like the most foul crime, that you can imagine, I mean, that just makes it worth it.
When it comes to what you do, you have to come up with unique ways of catching crooks, I bet.
Sure.
Everybody sees CSI, or they see Dayline, they see 48 Hours, they see 2020, and they think, oh, this is all wrapped up in an hour. They don't see the days of banging your head into the wall that you just don't go forward. So how do you manage to try to come up with some creative ways to solve these crimes, because not every crime is solved in 45 minutes?
No, and matter of fact, not every crime is solved in 45 days. We have a great team that I work with. There's several detectives, and everybody kind of brings in their own unique perspective on a case. So there'll be multiple times where, I have hit that wall and I am literally at wit's end, and for some reason I can't see the forest for the trees. So I have to pass it off to somebody else and say, hey, with a fresh pair of eyes, I need you to look at this, see if I'm missing something, and it just works out great that way.
Something you came up with seems so basic, but would be something you could overlook. How did the spreadsheet come about?
So it was really great. So we had, thousands of cases from the late 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And those detectives did the best they could back then. They didn't have the technology that we have today, the resources. So what we decided to do was, we're going to take their hard work and all their legwork, really, because that's all you had back then, and we're going to digitize it, and we're going to break it down step by step, and we're going to build off of it with the resources that we have now. And it has been exponential. The ground that we have gained, it's immeasurable. I mean, you can't, it's crazy.
What have you done with it? What have you accomplished with it?
So we have, like I said, the backlog stuff, all kind of, the area that we're focused on is like the late 70s to early 90s. So we took these case files and we broke them down from time of day, time of year, day of the week, all the information we had on the victims, all the information we had on the suspects, the locations. I mean, just everything, we just picked it apart. And what we did was we broke it down in such a way that we could then go back into the spreadsheet, simply Control F, and start looking for keywords. And these same keywords kept popping up, and we're like, oh man, we are onto something.
What have you discovered through that?
Well, so far we've linked several serial suspects from these decades, and we're closing in. I mean, we're just almost at the finish line.
How many serial rapists were at work in the Louisville metro area in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
To answer that, I don't know. What I can tell you is that we know of at least 5.
5 serial rapists?
Five cases where the MOs were similar, the description of the suspect was similar, maybe weapons used during the commission of the crime was similar. And so we've been able, since we broke that down so far, we've been able to rebuild it and go a different path with it towards kind of this goal of who these people are.
But these are previously unidentified rapists? Is that what they are?
Sure. Now, a lot of it did come from DNA also. So, we did a great job with the backlog stuff, sending off these kits to have the DNA tested. And that was a big part of it too. I mean, it wasn't just, we were able to uncover this on our own. It gave us names on some of them.
But you're also cramped in this closet with your closest working partner.
Yeah.
And you're bouncing. What's that like when you're doing that and all of a sudden she says something, you say something, and all of a sudden you realize?
I mean, it is literally a moment of eureka. I mean, I can't even describe it because it's almost like you have to see it in action. We will literally be working two separate cases that we believe are similar, and we'll look at each other and be like, this is it. And it's almost like a light switch when it finally clicks.
In some of these cases, has the DNA been hit, this backlog DNA been found and hit, and some of them you haven't, and now you're able to?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So, you get a DNA hit that says it's this person, but another kit may not have DNA, or it may have something we haven't tested yet, or just whatever, but we know it's the same because everything else matches. So it's not just speculation anymore, it's a solid hypothesis that evidence is leading us down this path to this being the suspect.
When we started talking, and you said, we know there were serial rapists working, and just nobody knew it. It shook me when I heard the word serial rapist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not something people expect in their community, is it?
No. And it's happening now. Just now we're more ahead of the game. We have the resource that we have now. But also, too, I mean, these detectives from the 80s, I mean, they were cool men and women because they were starting to piece some of this stuff together. They had, wanted flyers and composite sketches from cities over in Indiana. They had composite and sketches from smaller police cities within inside Jefferson County. So they were almost there. I mean, they were putting the pieces together. They just didn't have the DNA. They didn't have the technology. Whenever
we see true crime shows, we hear about those detectives just didn't know what they were doing. You say it's just the opposite.
I do. It's sad because you look at those and you're like, man, they did know. I mean, they were out there. They were doing the legwork. They were wearing the soles off their shoes. I mean, they did all the neighborhood canvases they could. They collected all the evidence that they could. And then they hit that wall, and in 1985 or 86, once you hit the wall, it was done. I mean, you couldn't do anything else.
Didn't have DNA.
You didn't have DNA. Well, you had it, but nobody had the concept of what CODIS was going to be. DNA testing was a thing, but nobody had any idea that it was going to be such an important part of investigation now.
Can you imagine what it would have been like to be doing your job in 1985?
I can't. I've been blessed to, have a smartphone and, a laptop computer I can carry around. And these guys, they were walking around with 2 pens and a notebook.
Trying to bring peace to these victims.
Right, trying to bring closure, and when you're out of straws, you're out of straws. I mean, there's just nothing more those men and women could have done.
Have you heard from any of those old detectives?
No. Well, I say no. I did reach out to a couple. A couple of these cases have started the prosecution process, and you make contact with one of those guys and you talk to them, and they're like, man, they wish they were still around. They wish they still had a uniform on or a detective's badge and could be there when the person's taken into custody.
Was the investment in clearing the DNA backlog worth it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, whatever money was set aside, and I don't know the number, but I think it's paid for itself tenfold. Because if you can make contact with a victim and give them some closure, I think it's worth 10 times as much as any tax dollar.
One of the tough parts of the job must be when you run these backlogs and something from 30 years ago pops as having no match, yet you still have to call the victim.
Yeah.
What's that call like?
It's tough. And when it's not a call that I make, it's not a call that I make alone, because I can't provide the victims adequately with advocacy. So we have a team here with Louisville Metro Police Department, and it's the Victim Services Unit. And they are masters of their craft.
But they've got to dig up an old wound, rip it open, and then sometimes tell the victim, we can't do anything for you. Just a reminder, we can't do anything for you.
Yeah. With the good comes the bad. I mean, we can't ignore that. We can't, create something that's not there. But still, the victim has the right to know, that they weren't forgotten about, that, it did take some years. We righted the wrong. We're trying to work it now. And at some point, at some times, though, that wall's still there. Some
of these women, they don't want to help. They don't want to be a part of the prosecution, even if there's been a DNA hit.
And what do you do? I can't, I try to be empathetic, but I can't imagine, detective, I haven't spoken to a detective in 30 years. Why are you calling me now? I have moved on. I've gotten my closure, and then that's great. And we cut ties and we say, if you ever need anything, please call us back. We're always here. If you do need victim services, please reach out. And then that's it. You can't.
Is that allowing rapists to stay free? Have you come across any cases where, because a woman does not want to prosecute or does not want to get involved in the case, a long time later, that there are rapists walking free?
I would say not.
Most of these guys are behind bars?
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't want to, put that on a victim of, if they didn't want to help, then somebody else got hurt. It's, these guys, they're serial offenders for a reason. These aren't, unfortunately, one and done. So if you don't want to move forward and you don't want to help, I respect that. They're still going to be caught. They're still going to be punished.
You had one from 1983 that popped for you, and you had a rapport with the lady.
Loved her. She was the coolest woman. 88 years old, tough old bird, meeting with her and talking about her case. That's one that I'll never forget her.
I listened to your conversations with her, and you had a real rapport. She reminds you of your grandmother?
She just reminded me of, yeah, you could say that, a grandmotherly figure. But, when I meet with these people, I tend not to have a badge and a gun on. I tend to just come in like a person. It can be very overwhelming. We just talked. We talked about things that had nothing to do with her case. We talked about what she's done with her life since this happened. We talked about her family, her job. We just chatted.
She was 88, 35 years after her rape, and you're telling her, you know who it is. We need your help to go after him. And what did she say?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Henry Crawford was brought up on charges in this case, was scheduled for a day in court, and you don't hear from the victim for a while, and then you get a phone call. What was that phone call like?
It was tough. She had passed away. It was devastating.
How was it devastating for you?
Because at some point there had been a transition from a victim in a cold case to she was a friend. It hurt. It hurt because I don't think it hurt. Man, it hurt for a lot of reasons. It hurt because she was never going to see him punished for the crime that he committed against her. And that really hurt. He's still in prison, and he's going to stay in prison, and he's going to die in prison.
But he'll never be convicted for her rape.
He will not.
It'll go as an unsolved case.
But as I sit here today, he knows that I know. And he knows that she knew.
What's that worth?
As much as it can. He knew her name. I made sure that he knew why I was there that day that I talked to him and collected his DNA again. I wanted him to know.
Does he know that she's dead?
Probably. Well, I digress. He probably does now, because unfortunately, when a case is set for trial like this one was, and the victim passes away, it stops because.
Not trying to overthink it philosophically, but do you think maybe she had peace when she died because of the work you guys had done?
She did. There's no doubt in my mind. You know, our talks were candid. She did. She got as much closure as she could. And at you know, at her age, she had moved on. And I did have to bring it all back up again. And
she didn't realize that she'd bit him. She didn't realize that, I mean, she knew that she'd fought him, and she said she was mad as hell.
She was. She was mad.
She hit him with a rake. Hit him with a rake.
Yep.
And
she
then
fought back, just wasn't strong enough at the time.
And then she credited later in your interview maybe a neighbor coming home from work at GE that may have scared him off. Did you ever wonder when you heard that story whether that neighbor hadn't come home, whether homicide would have been investigating this case and not you?
That's something we think about with all of our cases. Sexual assault is, it's a horrific crime. There's only one more step to making it a homicide. And I always tell my victims when I talk to them, you did the right thing. You survived. You know, because we can work through the sexual assault investigation part of it. We can't work through a homicide. So I always tell them, you did exactly what you needed to do to survive.
What would you tell a victim who doesn't know what to do? They've been victimized and they don't know how to come forward.
You know, it's hard. I always tell my victims that I'll never try to convince them to talk to the police. But on the same token, I'll never try to convince them out of talking to the police. I'm trusting that you will trust me enough to come and talk about the most horrific thing that's ever happened to you. And that's hard. That's a hard pill for someone to tell a stranger. And sometimes by the time I get there, they've already talked to a patrolman. They've already talked to at least one nurse, EMS, now a doctor, and I'm maybe the fifth person. They might be tired of talking about it, you know, at that point. So it's hard. I don't ask too much from my victims. You know, I'm there to service them, you know, as little or as much as that may be. But if everyone I talk to, every victim I've ever met, I tell them how proud I am of them. Because I can't imagine. I have no idea what they've gone through. And I don't try to understand. I try to express empathy for them and reassurance, but I'm not going to belittle it and try to even imply that I understand what they're going through. So I think they're strong. Every victim I meet is so darn tough, you know, to make the decision to go to a hospital, to talk to a nurse, to talk to an advocate, to talk to a detective. That's strength.
There's a concern in your division right now with children's numbers being so low. What do you think's going on?
With what? I'm sorry.
Okay.
You know what? It's so funny. For a second there, I went back to the victim we were just talking about.
What was going through your mind?
Nothing. Just I can see her. I can see her sitting in her apartment, you know, smoking her cigarette and just chatting. It was a little flashback.
No, that's all right. That's okay. You can talk about her. We got time.
No, she's just, I miss her. You know, when
she had no family.
She didn't.
Why did they call you?
Well, it's funny because I expressed a great interest in being her next of kin. You know, she didn't have any family. She was 88 years old. You know, she didn't have anybody except the neighbor in her assisted living complex. And we would talk, and I told her one day she had just gotten sick, pneumonia or something. And I said, you know, if something ever happens to you, I want to know. And so we worked it out. I was, I don't want to say that it was, completely legal through the courts, but I was like, listen, somebody needs to know. I want to know. If something happens to her and she has to go to the hospital. I want to know. You need to call me. And she signed the paperwork, and she was like, listen, I want Detective Pedigo to know. And so that's what it was. It was just, who do you call?
When you have nobody.
And then I wanted to be somebody.
You were. Before I wrap up my questions, we'll head up on a higher note.
Please.
Tell me about this partner of yours.
She's great. It's really good when you have somebody at work that you're kind of like-minded, but can still call you out. I consider us great friends. She's a trusted confidant, and that's good because when you're not doing something to the best, they can say, hey, you're not doing something to your best. Refocus. And that's great. And she has done exceptional work with this backlog stuff. It is, everybody in the unit is doing a great job. They have their thing. And her thing is the backlog. Her thing is cold cases. Her thing is finding the person 25, 30 years later and saying, now's the time when you're going to be held accountable. So
You don't want to get in her way?
you don't want to get, she's a bull. She's a good partner to have. She's sharp as a tack, and she's as strong as iron.
When you're in those close quarters in that closet, I would imagine you can get on each other's nerves when you're talking about old cases and stuff. And
We can get on each other's nerves. Not
I
talking
know you
about
well enough. I know you get on people's nerves anyway, Kris.
Yeah.
No, but seriously though, you're in close quarters. It's a stressful time. You're working overtime. You're trying to solve this stuff. One of you is at some point is going to get hangry, or
Yeah.
you're going to get to the point where you're just like, this is not happening fast enough.
For sure. And what's great about it is we know and respect each other enough to know when it's a personal frustration versus a case frustration of, let's go eat. Let's go grab a burrito because, I am getting hangry. And, and you can only look at so many cases for so long before, your vision just starts getting blurry. And there's thousands.
And I know we can't get too far into the details, but you're about to make a road trip.
We are.
How excited are you?
Super. It is. We've closed in on somebody that we know is a bad guy. DNA came back and said that he committed these offenses. And then through the spreadsheet and through tedious case study, we're like, these are all him. And there's a stack we're taking with us. And the win is us leaving from this road trip, look at each other after we get a confession.
How many cases do you think?
We're taking a box with us.
20, 30, 40?
We're taking a box with us.
This could be one of the worst serial rapists in Louisville history that you know of.
Could be. And wouldn't it be great to do a follow-up story where we close these cases on this guy?
Some people would say he's not going anywhere anyway because he's locked up for a long time. Why spend all this time, all this effort?
The ultimate goal is to put bad guys in prison. That's why anybody becomes a cop anyways. You want to put bad guys behind bars, I can say that he is currently serving a life sentence. Now, he'll be eligible for parole someday. Our goal is to make sure he never gets parole.
At the beginning of this conversation, I asked you why you do what you do. And through this conversation, I try to get a feel for why you do what you do. So I'll ask you again, why do you do what you do?
There is no better feeling, I think, than making that phone call. It's all about the victim. If it weren't for me, somebody else would be sitting here. Somebody else would be doing the legwork now. Somebody else would be doing, I'm not special in the sense that behind me aren't 5 other detectives that would step into my shoes in a heartbeat. The reason why I do it is because the victim, I just want to give them something that they never had. And I can't reiterate that enough. I mean, if it wasn't for the generations before me and Detective Lynch wouldn't be here today. You know, if it wasn't for the support of our command staff saying, hey, I don't care what the overtime number is. Show me some work and just keep going. You know, I mean, even meeting with the new chief of police. I met with her last Wednesday, and she's in. You know, she doesn't care about the number. She wants to close cases. She wants to make sure victims are getting the services they need. It's a collaborative. You know, I wish, yeah, I'm the one sitting here, but man, if it wasn't for, 20 people behind me building us up and giving us the resources and telling us to go do great things, it wouldn't have happened.